So we know Commissioner Willie is not at the night market.
We got to keep going until it gets below 90 so I can cycle home. So,
We'll call you an Uber. Commissioner Willie's in the attendee list. There we go. Oh, look at that. They have an on-air visual now. Cool. I hadn't noticed that before. That's neat.
So we are live for whenever you want to begin, Chair.
Thank you for our evening clerk, Anna Niola. Thank you for joining us today and helping us through this meeting. Welcome everyone to the Tuesday, July 26, 2022 Washington County Board of Commissioners meeting. Board Clerk, if you could do us the honors, please.
The Board of County Commissioners, also serving as the governing body of clean water services and all other county service districts, is now meeting in regular session Tuesday, July 26, 2022. Commissioner Feik?
Here.
Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Vice Chair Willie?
Here.
Chair Harrington?
Here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Treese is excused. She's on vacation. We have no updates to this evening's agenda to report this evening, so we'll move right into our public comment period. This is an opportunity for members of our community to speak with us on any subject matter they would care to for up to 2 minutes. Please note that we do have 2 public hearings later in the evening as well. Ms. Niola, do we have anyone who wishes to address us now?
No one signed up for this period, but if anybody attending would like to speak now, please raise your hand. I see the people that are raising their hand. Their topic is regarding one of the public hearings. Let's see. Sherry, can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay. So I'm allowed to talk about it now and not wait till 7? It's okay?
Oh, no, if this is concerning a public hearing, I didn't see you signed up.
Oh, I didn't know what you meant. Okay. So wait till 7?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we may get to it before then.
And that's it. So no one for this period.
All right, thank you, Ms. Niola. Next, we'll move to adopt our consent agenda. This evening's consent agenda consists of 6 items. 2 items from Clean Water Services, 3 items from Land Use and Transportation, and 1 from County Administration. We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. We have a second from Commissioner Feik. All those in favor of adopting today's consent agenda, please raise your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, we have a presentation regarding the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, the quarterly report for the quarter of April 2022 through the end of June 2022. So I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Latricia Tillman, our Chief Equity Officer. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. It's nice to see you tonight, and I will be joined this evening by Amanda Garcia-Snell, Brianna Jackson, and Matt Craigie. All right. And I'm looking for the slides to come up. Great, thank you. So we are presenting on quarter 2, 2022, which is April through June. And if we go to the next slide, I can add a couple of contextual comments. So while change is constant over the course of human history, certain watershed moments or eras have pulled us as humans globally and as a nation either toward or away from the oppression of others or toward or away from the recognition of our shared humanity and equality. In the months since we presented last, many of us found ourselves in another watershed moment as it relates to equality as defined by gender, identity, racial identity, and class. None of the branches of government or governmental institutions nor our nation's constitution is infallible. And at every level of government, we're called to continuous improvement to create a more perfect union. And our country's commitment to equity requires us to always ask continuous improvement for whom? The 4th of July weekend, in which we saw murder, mass murder, and also the death of an unarmed Black man, we saw that juxtaposition between the value of a life of a mass murderer and an unarmed individual. And as we continue to consider how we can advance equity within our spheres of influence, we at OEICE, the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, are also encouraging a consideration of intersectionality of identities. For example, while Washington County strives to address present-day inequities, such as birth outcomes, we are focusing in on poor outcomes borne by Black women related to infant and maternal mortality. As we do that, we have to recognize that the experience of pregnancy for Black women during slavery was coerced and without consent. In fact, the very field of gynecology has its roots in white men's use of Black women's bodies for research, again, without consent. The professionalization of nurses, marginalized Black midwives and doulas whose knowledge had roots far more historical than Western medicine. And in many of our lifetimes, white healthcare institutions subjected Black women, Latinas, and Indigenous women to forced sterilization in the name of public health, again, without Black, Latina, and Indigenous women's knowledge or consent. Our equity work, whether local or on a larger scale, has to recognize the intersection of gender, race, and class in order to dismantle the structures that make it possible to undermine fundamental rights to women's health, infant health, and bodily autonomy. Similarly, as our workforce was once again reeling from the mass murders in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas, we've also spent time reflecting on the causes of gun violence in our communities, including the toxic combination of hypermasculinity, racism, the violence of poverty, and the legal legacy of physical violence, and the lack of value placed on Black, Indigenous, Brown, Latino, Latinx, and immigrant lives throughout our nation's history. Both of these examples are a reflection of how we in the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement approach our equity work. We lead with race, but we don't stop there. We consider the ways our society and our county policies and practices marginalize people across race and age, race and geography, race and class, race and gender identity, race and sexual orientation, disability, and veteran status. We cannot ignore the fact that in all of the various ways people have experienced marginalization, racism compounds that marginalization even further. To move forward, we have to consider both our universal goals for equity and how people in our Washington County community experience barriers to the best possible outcomes. Next slide, please. So what do we do to advance equity? So equity, as you all know, is focused on outcomes. We will have achieved equity when we can no longer predict outcomes by race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, veteran status, geography, etc. We will know we are on the way to equity when we can no longer predict leadership, access to power, and participation in shaping policy and programs by race and other social factors. In order to do that, we need robust community engagement to develop pathways to dismantle barriers to participation, to decision-making, and build processes that engage more voices, wisdom, and experience. That engagement will help inform not just our desired outcomes from our investments, but tailored strategies that recognize we don't all have the same starting point in life or in our families' lives. My experiences, challenges, and opportunities are not the same as yours, and vice versa. Equitable policymaking Equitable program design requires identifying, understanding, and addressing structural barriers to optimal outcomes. It is a never-ending journey of listening and learning. Next slide, please. At some point in our quarterly presentations, I identified that we would be in the initial stages of change through 2022. That was so optimistic. Here we are halfway through 2022, and what I'm recognizing, as I am sure you are as well, that this is a cyclical rather than a linear process. We are definitely seeing initial results, as you will hear, but each initiative OEICE and others takes on to advance equity puts us back at point 2, change introduced, of introducing change, point 3, resistance, and point 4, unlearning, until we see more initial results. In the context of transitioning to One Washington County, design the future, and the upcoming community strategic plan for Washington County, while still weathering the COVID pandemic, this organization continues to adapt to change on multiple fronts. The graciousness of staff towards each other as we move forward with exceptionally full plates has been something that continues to impress me. Next slide. As our work evolves, one thing that we're learning in OEICE is that there is less and less separation or distinction between community engagement and equity, diversity, and inclusion work. Community engagement is a central pillar of effective equity work. So as we move forward in our quarterly reports to your board, we will separate out the work for reporting purposes and in our team structure. However, we are noticing that it is becoming increasingly challenging to separate out the community engagement from the equity, diversity, and inclusion work as we move forward. So just to touch base on 2 points that are new within this timeline, we just continue to add to it. April 2022, you all established the Advisory Council on Racial Equity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then this past June, you adopted a budget that was informed for the first time by the budget equity tool. So we thank you for your continued commitment to our equity journey. And at this point, I will turn it over to Amanda to talk about initiatives and accomplishments of the community engagement team over the past quarter.
Thanks, Latricia. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. As Latricia mentioned, I'm Amanda Garcia-Snell, and I'm here to share a bit of the latest work happening in community engagement.
Sorry, Amanda. Vice Chair Willie has an urgent need.
Sure.
Well, it isn't an urgent need. I just want to respond back to ask for clarification from Latricia when she said it's becoming more increasingly difficult to separate out equity from community engagement. Did I hear that correctly, Latricia? And could you give me a little bit more information behind that? Because that seems that doesn't seem to jive for me. So can you give me more information on that?
Sure, and it was really just more in how we structure this quarterly report. In the past, we've had a community engagement section, and then we've had an equity section. And now we see more community engagement around some of our critical equity work. And we also see our equity work involving more community engagement. So it's more that for us, the lines are blurring in how we've structured our reporting process. And the lines blur somewhat in terms of how we do our work within our office, so that the community engagement team is often leading on equity work and our equity team is often doing community engagement.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. I just misunderstood what you said there. So thank you very much for that clarification. And sorry, Amanda, I didn't mean to get in front of you there.
Oh, that's all right. Next slide, please. And next slide. So this slide is not new. It's one that we put into the presentation, but it is a representation of the various ways in which community can engage with you all and staff throughout the county. And so we just keep adding it or continue to show it because I think it really highlights that it's so much more than any one specific event. There are all these opportunities that people have to engage, and we're really working to, as Latricia mentioned, make those equitable. Next slide, please. So beginning with some of our externally facing projects, we have reapportionment, which, as you know, now we are conducting the community engagement in 3 phases. We're currently in phase 2 and planning the planning stage for phase 3. To accomplish this work, which includes in-person and virtual events, as well as digital engagement and an online survey, and some of those things are focused specifically on culturally specific participation. We are working with espousal strategies to help us carry the water on that work and really ensure that we're and community-based organizations to ensure that we're connecting with the community. And then, as you heard earlier today, we had a last-minute opportunity to be at the fair on Saturday, and with the proposed map option, the proposed district maps to share with the public, and we had about 47 people identify their preferred option over the course of the day. So that was pretty great because that was sort of a last minute pull together, and we were happy that we were able to do that. And thank you, Tom and Sylvia, for representing us, as well as OEIC staff. Then Cpo Revisioning. So this is a long-term project that will start by looking at Cpo boundaries to potentially align with the new commissioner districts. So it's really, we won't fully kick this work off until we have a better sense of what the districts will be, and until those are approved by you all and later this year. But until that work is in full swing, we have contracted with Linda Jaramillo to facilitate conversations and to help us develop service agreements in the interim period that we can have with CPOs and CCI, so that we can have really clear roles about the work that we're doing together. This service agreement process has already begun with a survey to CPO leaders and CCI representatives, and then she'll be having more in-depth conversations with them. For civic leadership training, we received some really great proposals from a variety of culturally specific community-based organizations, and so much so that the requests are over twice as much money as we have set aside to provide for this project. And so we're really, as we review those proposals, we're really starting to think creatively about how can we fund these things, or what can we do to provide comprehensive civic leadership training opportunities to the community. And so I'm super excited about the response that we got, and we'll keep you posted on how that goes. In terms of the quarterly town hall, so we held this Q2 town hall on June 23rd. It was focused on resources and programs for older adults. There were 20 people on Zoom that were not staff, and at the time, 22 views on YouTube. I just checked this morning, and we were up to 79 views on YouTube. And so we have started planning the Q3 town hall, which is scheduled for September 28th. Next slide, please. In regard to regional partnerships, and this is one of the examples that Latricia was referring to, we're working with the cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton to conduct ARPA-related community engagement. And the 3 of us jurisdictions will be contracting with a team led by Espousal Strategies, and included in their team are a variety of culturally specific and responsive organizations to help conduct that work. Really, the goal here is to have some shared community engagement practices and build capacity within CBOs for community engagement. There's been a fair amount of administrative work to get to this point when you have 3 jurisdictions involved in that type of process, but Espousal is officially on board, and this week we will introduce them to the COVID Racial Advisory Group, who had a significant role in helping us with the RFP and selecting the contractor. Next slide, please. So for our internal projects that we're working on, the Equitable Community Engagement Policy, which I brought to you a couple of weeks ago and will bring back after more fiscal and legal analysis, as well as more stakeholder input. And I'll be coming back to you in September with that, I think tentatively scheduled for September. And as a reminder, this policy is really about ensuring best practices across the organization for equity-centered engagement. It's also related to the ARPA work in the sense that the jurisdictions have committed to alignment of best practices and engagement strategies in an effort to reduce burden to community-based organizations and the community as a whole. And so we'll be working closely with the jurisdictions on that too. Sorry, not specifically on the policy, but on those strategies. And boards and commissions. So we continue to use the data that we collect in the application process to inform our recruitment work. In addition to that, the Equity Leadership Council Committee that's focused on diversity and inclusion best practices for boards and commissions has been working for over a year on standards and shared practices related to recruitment, onboarding, training, bylaws, all things boards and commissions in the county. They're really, it's a great committee. They've been really motivated. They've taken on some big pieces of work. In that process, their work has also really highlighted the need for us to think about the overall role of boards and commissions in the county, which is a big question. And so I think we're just kind of recognizing the need to start thinking about that and where do they fit in the community engagement spectrum, and what are we asking of them, et cetera. And so lots of big questions related to that, and we'll start looking at this in the coming months and figure out what we need to do. The Land Acknowledgement Implementation Group had their kickoff meeting at the end of June and is really ready to hit the ground running with looking at the recommendations from our Indigenous partners in relation to county practice. And so they're going to start with looking at the various types of meetings that are held throughout the county organization, held by the county organization, and really start to dive into, what are those meetings? What is, how could they be categorized in a sense of how does the land acknowledgement, how would it be most relevant and meaningful to recognize in those processes? Next slide, please. So bridging between internal and external engagement are our Cultural Heritage Month celebrations. And so these, as you may know, these started out as a small way to raise awareness and celebrate with staff, and they really have become pretty popular opportunities to build relationship and community connection internally and externally, and in some instances have led to policy change, as we saw with the Juneteenth holiday and the creation of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Business Council by the Washington County Chamber of Commerce. And I just noticed we're missing an H, so we can get that. We're an N, we're missing a letter there, so we can get that corrected. But these staff, there's some pictures there, staff marching in Pride Parade and the Juneteenth celebration. And so there's been a lot of interest and excitement from staff to participate in events, and a lot of creativity around, what are the ways in which we can celebrate. Next slide. And then finally, our e-update. So it continues to grow with increased subscribership, and it seems to be well received. It's a way for us to share engagement opportunities. We do this on a weekly basis, and we have been sharing other information as well. Sometimes, health alert information, COVID testing opportunities, or heat advisory stuff. So opportunities to share that information, because we do push it out weekly, and it is intended for CBOs and other community stakeholders. And so we're up to about 620 contacts on that list. And with that, I will pass it back to Latricia.
I think you have one more, Amanda.
Oh yeah, Acre, most exciting. Well, or certainly very exciting. I don't want to say the most exciting, but so the as you know, the Advisory Council on Racial Equity, we just had the launch last week. If I'm getting my weeks are starting to blur together. So this is you all adopted the charter earlier this year, and then appointed members in June. We had a lot of folks interested in this. And of course, this has been a long time coming. One of the components of the equity resolution. And so very exciting to officially be launching this group. It's a great group of community participants, and the chair and Commissioner Treese are also on ACRE, as we affectionately call it. And with that, I will pass it back.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And thank you to all your team that's doing just an amazing amount of work, especially with one current vacancy that we're filling. So they're definitely shouldering quite a load on behalf of the county. So next slide, please. All right, so we're going to pivot to focus on the work related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the next slide, please. So as you know, we've been continuing to live into the equity resolution internally in Washington County with a development of our Equity Leadership Council committees. And you can see the 6 that are listed there on the right. They've been focused on development and implementation of equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies, standards, policies, and tools based on best and emerging best practices. Next slide. They're currently in the late stages of membership recruitment to fill vacancies, either that have been created because people left the county or changed jobs or have work-life balance that they're trying to maintain. They've done quite a bit of work around all the charges within the 6 committees. We had a separate committee focused on limited English assistance policy implementation that we recently sunsetted and moved under the Civil Rights Compliance Committee. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then, as you know, they developed the budget equity tool under the leadership of Ashley Horn, our equity policy manager. Work in progress now is co-creating a legislative equity tool with government relations and the Equity Leadership Council Equity Policy Committee. And they're hard at work on the bilingual pay policy update. This is something that has been a high priority for our office since its inception, and I know a priority for many others within the county. And we're using equity best practices and engagement, staff engagement, empowerment practices to help inform a thorough update of that policy. And then we will pivot from that policy back to develop policy and procedures for our employee resource groups to get those launched. Next slide, please. Okay, so the limited English assistance policy was a policy that you adopted in late 2020. And we have been working really hard with our departmental partners to understand what currently is happening in terms of how departments are assuring interpretation support for our community members with limited English proficiency. But we have also built into the budget equity tool an explicit ask for how much we're investing in interpretation, translation, and accommodations for people with disabilities. So when we think about language access or language access support, we think about multiple languages, including ASL, but also like large font or Braille for people with disabilities. As I mentioned, the LEAP committee sunsetted and will be moving under our Civil Rights Compliance Committee, as this is a pillar of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is focused on client civil rights. And we are continuing to work with departments to identify their vital documents for proactive translation. What's what you see on your screen as part of the work that we're doing countywide, we will be installing large I Speak posters with multiple languages in public-facing lobbies to make it easy for individuals to identify the language that they speak and what language they need interpretation in, and to communicate very clearly that interpretation services are free to the public. And then we have also printed an array of I Speak cards, and these are like wallet-sized cards that are on one side in English say the language that they need interpretation support in, and on the other side in the person's preferred language explains that they have a right to a competent interpreter free of charge. These will be available for order from our for our community partners. So we will make those available to community partners to distribute to the communities that they serve who need language assistance. Next slide. So we're really excited about that. Next slide. I just wanted to close the loop on the budget equity tool. This is information you've already seen several times, but I wanted to put it here for posterity just to reflect that the budget equity tool was developed less than a year ago, was piloted briefly in 2021, and then was adopted and applied in our budget season in 2022 with the results that you see in front of you, codifying our investments that will help advance Washington County towards equity. Next slide, please. And I tried to connect all the dollar slides together. So pivoting slightly, focusing on an update, we've been kind of making our way through a year of reporting on our spending for minority, women, emerging small businesses. There's a number of other designations as well, but they all fall under the COVID acronym, which is the Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity. So as you can see, about the beginning of the 21-22 fiscal year, very small spend rate, but fast forward to the end of this fiscal year, our total COVID spend was about 3.74%. This is based on 36 contracts with currently certified COVID suppliers, and some suppliers go in and out of COVID certification. And so this is based on which suppliers were certified at the time that this report was put together. Next slide, please. To break that down a little bit further, you can see all the various designations that are included under that COVID umbrella. So Native American, LGBT, disabled veteran, DBE, which is disadvantaged business enterprise, women business enterprise, minority business enterprise, etc. And so as of July 1st, 2021, 37% of total vendors registered were I don't know what that's connected to. I apologize. I'm looking in my notes for that. 444 vendors have registered since July 1st, 2021. So that's 37% of our total vendors have registered since July. 20%, or 1 in 5, are certified MWESB suppliers, and greater than 50% are Oregon or local suppliers. And then we are seeing some registrations from nonprofits in the area. So this chart kind of points to the need to update our data systems because, as I mentioned before, certification and self-identification are two different things. This is self-identified entities, self-identified as minority, women, emerging small business, or other designations. Okay. So what I want to do in the next slide is pass the mic over to Matt Craigie to talk a little bit more about our partnerships. And you'll be hearing from Matt Craigie, our Economic Development Manager, as well as Brianna Jackson, our Learning and Development Manager, because the work that we do in the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement really relies on partnerships across the organization. So as we go forward, we'll continue to build in updates from our partners within Washington County who can share a little bit about our work. And so with that, I will turn it over to Matt Craigie.
Great, thank you, Latricia. I hope my fan isn't too loud here. It's a little warm in the home office. Yeah, so Latricia, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words here in OEICE's update. As your board will recall, Washington County's economic development program is closely linked to OEICE's external engagement work. In fact, we've been looking for more and more opportunities to sync and align our efforts. In doing so, we aim to provide community partners with clearer and more transparent ways to connect with the county, build trust and relationships by making what is important to them important to us, and to help to focus investment in response to community needs. So here are just a few examples on this slide of the work that OEICE and economic development are addressing together. So in that first bullet point about sponsorships, the county has for a long time provided sponsorships for a variety of community organizations. We're now looking for opportunities to provide sponsorships to local organizations that further the goals of equitable economic development, including for organizations that support entrepreneurs and small businesses, small business development, train workers and provide career exposure, apprenticeships and learning opportunities for youth, provide technical assistance and businesses for businesses at all stages of the business cycle, and also importantly, and as highlighted in Latricia's past couple of slides, increase supplier diversity here at the county. So these two examples that we have on this slide are OWAMI's youth conference, that's Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs Youth Conference, we're sponsoring them, and a couple of Business Diversity Institute programs, so BDI's programs. OWAMI's youth conference focuses on minority youth, providing them with opportunities to connect and learn from experienced mentors. The conference provides youth training on topics such as business development and entrepreneurship, basics in personal and business financing, and basics in marketing and sales. Business Diversity Institute is an organization that provides training to minority-owned and women-owned local businesses. BDI's Leadership Recharge sponsorship helps to fund businesses to attend this event, where they can build their network and gain access to curriculum such as business planning, business transitioning, leadership, marketing, and financials. BDI's Minority Enterprise Development Week, MED, provides workshops for industry-relevant education to small business owners and their partners. The second example that we have on the slide here for you this evening is a collaboration between OEICE, Economic Development, and this is demonstrated in the Calle Diez partnership. So community discussions about the Bridge Shelter, which sits on 10th Avenue in Hillsborough, also known as Calle Diez in Spanish, led to deeper discussion within community about what the primarily Latina-owned businesses along the street want to see and need to thrive in their area. So OEICE and economic development help to support the Latino Policy Council, the city of Hillsborough, and other partners to identify collaborative solutions to issues with safety, security, and waste cleanup. So with a grant from the county and substantial investment from the city of Hillsborough, this benefits to the county is underway right now, and we'll be coming back at a later point to report back on more of that work. So these are just a couple of examples of how OEICE and economic development staff are working together. We see a lot of opportunity for continued alignment, and staff from both groups keep in close contact regarding ongoing efforts and potential future collaborations. So thank you, and I think I'm turning it back to you, Latricia, is that right?
You can turn it to me, and then I'll pass the ball to Brianna, and we can go to the next slide.
Thank you so much. I'm Brianna Jackson, the Learning and Development Program Manager, and really excited to share a few updates regarding learning in partnership with the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. So the Equity Leadership Council Training Committee started this calendar year in support of the 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge led by OEICE. This challenge laid the foundation for additional challenges to follow, including the Pride Month Challenge led by the LGBTQ Celebration Committee last month, and the Trauma Informed Care Challenge hosted by Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Divisions happening right now. The training committee is continuing to research additional learning topics such as microaggressions, environmental and social justice, and active allyship in the workplace, just to name a few. So we're really excited about being able to move forward with additional opportunities of learning for our staff in a way that is accessible in many, many different forms. Additional learning opportunities that we've hosted are as follows. The trauma-informed return to work learning opportunities. One was how to focus on people leaders, and the other a focus for individual contributors. Both of those opportunities were led by Erin Fairchild of Collective Action Consulting. Additionally, Basic Rights Oregon's LGBTQIA2S+ workplace affirmation and inclusion training, which was filled to capacity in June and will now have a second session to support the demand of our employees. And most recently, the Mainstreaming of Anti-Semitism in America Lunch and Learn workshop by Bob Hornstein, Director of Community Relations and Public Affairs of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. This opportunity was in response to a community request, and we are grateful for Commissioner Nafisa Faye and her staff, Brenda Lynn Bartlett, for making the connection between OEICE and Mr. Hornstein. It was an incredible event, and we have the video, so we're really excited to continue offering that as an opportunity for our employees to learn. Something that I want to note about a couple of our opportunities is that we've also been able to partner with our benefits department to be able to offer wellness points as incentive for our employees to be able to attend these learning opportunities, which is really helping us to bridge the gap between not only like health and well-being, but actual career well-being and learning as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So I want to lift up the discrimination, harassment, and retaliation-free workplace policy training with great enthusiasm. So between mid-April and mid-June, Learning and Development in partnership with OEICE launched a campaign to bring our employees compliant with Washington County Administrative Policy 301, titled Workplace Discrimination, Harassment, Sexual Assault, and Retaliation Prevention, and a related procedural policy 301A. I'm happy to report that 98% of our people leaders, 80% of our individual contributors, and each one of our board members were trained in roughly 7 weeks. And this was a live 2-hour training that took people away from their standard work to be able to learn this particular information. This training will be an annual requirement for all employees, and we are currently finalizing a contract with the trainer to continue to support employees who are outstanding and new staff as they are hired. We also look forward to expanding the focus of this training to include the Americans with Disabilities Act and client civil rights. And I just want to say that we also did a survey with this particular training and received incredible feedback from many people who thought that the training was well executed, that the communication was helpful to them to be able to get into the training, and the support that they received to ensure that they were able to have the time away from their desks to be able to do this training was adequate. So I'm really excited about the things that we're doing in partnership with OEICE and look forward to continuing that partnership. And I will turn the floor back over to Latricia. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Brianna and Matt, for your updates on our partnerships together in those areas. And as I move towards closure, I'll just highlight a couple of other partnerships. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the areas of partnership that is really essential to equity, diversity, and inclusion work is our partnership with human resources and the entire human resources team. But I really want to call out and appreciate the leadership of our chief HR officer and our talent acquisition team. So one of the items that has happened as a result of our partnership is that HR is eliminating pre-employment screening tests unless validated or required for certain public safety jobs. This practice was eliminated because it was determined to be a barrier to a large number of applicants who dropped out of the recruitment process at this step. And we found that some tests also resulted in a disparate impact for applicants who were Black, Indigenous, and Latino or Latinx. So really excited to take the time with HR to understand the dynamic and the impact of a practice that was longstanding within the county, and to understand its impact while it seemed neutral in its practice, understanding that it had a disparate impact. Second, we're really excited to be contracting with an organization called Workplace Change, a culturally progressive full-service human resources consultancy. They are working with the talent acquisition team to identify and implement equitable best practices in recruitment, hiring, and retention of people of color. So that's really exciting. They're engaging on their own assessment and change process. And then, as I mentioned earlier, OEICE is currently updating our bilingual pay policy. We're centering the experiences of bilingual staff to identify immediate and long-term solutions to the shortcomings of the existing policy, which falls short in supporting those who are providing vital language service to our community. One update that happened in the fall of 2020 is that the talent acquisition team, again, changed the bilingual proficiency testing company to Language Testing International due to the disparate impact the past tests had on native Spanish speakers. The switch to LTI has proven to be both more efficient and a better testing process. Next slide, please. We continue to partner with the housing department. As you know, 2 of our staff people within OEICE are dedicated 100% of the time to support the work of supportive housing services. And a few highlights of their work is one, there was a 3-day event in April that was a housing access fair that had approximately 160 attendees. The goal of that fair was to remove barriers that homeless people face when trying to access housing. They provided language support and accommodations for individuals with disabilities, and as a result, all of the available housing slots were filled. And there were additional supports such as meals being provided and clothing items such as shoes being purchased in support of our houseless neighbors. There was also some shelter siting engagements in partnership with Hillsborough and Beaverton, again, working across our jurisdictions to build equity into our housing decisions as it relates to siting. And you all received an update about our equitable siting policy. And then lastly, through a partnership with Sunrise Church, which was established as a hub for community donations, there's a partnership now with faith-based communities launching a donation drive in support of future supportive housing services placement. And so far, 54 welcome home kits have been provided for the Aloha Inn, which is opening in this fall or winter. Next slide, please. This is my final slide. As I mentioned, our equity work is about outcomes. And so we need data to understand where we have gaps in our outcomes. And in order to have data, to understand our gaps, we need data systems and infrastructure, as well as supportive policies that support the standardized collection and analysis, particularly of demographic data. So our Equity Leadership Committee, Equity Leadership Council, Equity Data Committee has conducted an initial analysis of Washington County's data infrastructure and systems and found gaps and inconsistencies, as well as areas needing improvement in the types of demographic data collected, how it's collected, whether it's shareable, etc. As an example, some data systems collect Hispanic Latino as a race, and some data systems collect Hispanic Latino as an ethnicity separate from race. And that makes it challenging to do any kind of cross comparison between those data systems. So the Equity Data Committee identified a need for a more comprehensive analysis, and the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement has been working with our ARPA team to design a countywide equity data assessment. And we launched that RFP in May and received 5 successful proposals in June, and we have since reviewed those proposals and have identified the opportunity to move forward with interviews with proposers before we move into the final contractor selection. But we anticipate that that will help to launch a very thorough, comprehensive equity data assessment, which will put us on a road to being able to develop our ability to collect and report out equity data. In addition to that equity data assessment through our ARPA funding, we will be hiring a civil rights compliance trainer. That person will be training organizations who are receiving federal ARPA dollars in their responsibility for compliance with civil rights, both employee civil rights as well as client civil rights. And we'll also be training our contract managers so that they can help coach our funded organizations as needed to come into compliance. We're also building out an equity coach kind of position to help ARPA funded projects think about how to more robustly build equity into their projects. And then, as Amanda mentioned during her section, and back to my comment about what fits in our equity bucket and what fits in our community engagement bucket, we are using our ARPA dollars to support the multi-jurisdictional community engagement project. So it all comes full circle in the connection between equity, diversity, and inclusion work and our community engagement work. So as we transition to the next slide, I just want to again thank the board for your support for our work, for the commitments you've made in ARPA investments in equity, and again with just deep gratitude for all of our partners across Washington County and our beloved Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement team. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, for any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Ms. Tillman, Ms. Garcia-Snell, Ms. Jackson, and Mr. Craigie. Commissioners, do you have any questions or thoughts for our team? Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers. Whoops, you're on mute, sir.
Am I not? No, I think I'm off. Thank you for telling me, though. Buttons clicking and unclicking don't always work as well as we would like them to. Just some general comment and question of you, Tanya. One, pleased to see the work that's being done in particularly Matt Craigie's area. My work on WSI, we're always looking to see if we can't engage communities who just don't have access to services. So I like that, Matt, a bunch. I'm talking to Tanya, but I see you nodding and I agree. The body of work is pretty stunning what we've done. So that's all interesting. One of the questions I have, to be kind of the Grinch of it, and I did that early on, so this isn't anything new, is what was this going to cost? And originally, We all supported the work. I still support the work. But I always like to wrap, I think it's an occupational hazard being an accountant, I like to wrap my head around costs so I know what's going on. I've heard of a couple of new positions tonight. I've heard of several new contracts. Originally, we were going to have one person, the board on a majority vote said, no, we're going to have 5. That was great. We are where we're at. And I certainly can't take exception to any of the great work that's been done. But I'm trying to understand what this is all costing, including benefits, so that I get asked that, if you can't imagine the number of times in the community, what is the program costing? And so nobody else may need to know, but I have an information need. Sure, I like what she says that all the time. She says she has an information need. I have one that I would like to be able to take out to groups and say, this is what our cost is, and this is the benefits. So anyway, that's my point. I compliment you, Tanya. It always comes from the top. People don't think that, but it's true. The tone's at the top, and you've been able to accomplish this through folks. And so I congratulate you on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. And so we can provide that in a written update, because I do think that question has been raised as far as what does this cost through this budget process. And so, for example, Ms. Tillman had referred to the 2 positions that we're supporting SHS, which is our Supportive Housing Services Program. Those positions are funded by the Supportive Housing Services measure. So as we think about equity at Washington County, it is about embedding equity practice in each of our departments. And so I would think of this as a centralized but decentralized effort, and that is in service to all of our community members as we move forward. So let me work with Ms. Tillman and providing that in writing, because this is a reoccurring question that comes up. It came up through the budget process, and we can provide that clarity of how we're structuring our work. And Ms. Tillman had referred to some of the costs and some of the outcomes, and we can make sure that we do include that into kind of a dashboard report to your board and also the community as we move forward, because we know our community and our community partners are also interested in this work.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll finish up. I want to thank you, as always, for these quarterly updates. It helps us be mindful of how we are doing a better job of serving our community and addressing their needs. And it also helps us take stock and recognize our progress on this journey. So thank you so much, team, for being with us this evening. And Matt, I hope the temperature will cool this evening in ways that I'm not sure it did last night. So everyone, please stay safe, drink lots of fluids, take good care of yourself. It's going to be hot here for a while in the Pacific Northwest.
Chair Harrington, can we do an agenda check-in? And I apologize, my mic wasn't working at the beginning of the meeting, but I do have an update on cooling shelters. And given the number of individuals that are on the attendee list, it may be beneficial to spread that word at this time, if the board is okay with an agenda change.
Sounds like a great idea. Go ahead, Ms. Angie.
Okay, thank you, Chair Harrington and board. And team, if they are on it, displaying a few slides. So I do want to provide the board and the community an update, given that we are in this extreme heat environment, our daytime and evening cooling resources and services. So much of what I will say, I am reading from the slide deck, but I do want to make sure that this information is available to our public, both from a verbal and also a written format. Because I know I and all of us can talk quickly right now or at any point in time. So in Washington County, we have close to 20 libraries and recreational facilities that are serving as daytime cooling shelters, some with extended hours into our evenings. An additional 14 other locations are serving as daytime splash pads or hydration stations. These locations, the cooling resources are all listed on the county's webpage and can be accessed by visiting www.staycoolwashingtoncounty.com. And that web extension is on the slide deck that you see displayed on your screen at this time. TriMet is providing free transportation to any cooling center in the 3-county region. Our encampment outreach staff are equipped with water, cooling towels, and other resources for those experiencing houselessness. This is the same resources that we are being made available to migrant farm workers. Next slide. So now we're transitioning into overnight shelters, and this is really timely information because our first overnight shelter for this extreme event did open at 7 p.m. tonight. Due to severe weather conditions, Washington County has activated inclement weather shelters that will provide emergency shelter capacity to ensure no one seeking shelter is turned away. These shelters will provide relief from extreme heat and access to air conditioning. To access these shelter beds, interested individuals can walk up to one of the locations listed below. So for this evening, that includes the Salvation Army building, and the address is listed as on the slide displayed. And this shelter is open as of 7 p.m. this evening. And it is accessible via TriMet route number 57. Starting tomorrow, this shelter, along with Beaverton Community Center, will be open, and the Beaverton Community Center is accessible via TriMet route numbers 52, 76, and 78. Shelters remain open 24 hours throughout the severe weather event. Meals are provided for guests, no one will be turned away, and pets are okay. For our guests, please be prepared to work with shelter staff and how to accommodate your pets at these shelter locations. I do want to extend significant appreciation to our Washington County staff and our partners.
But Mr. Roberts, you're welcome to take a break till 8:15.
Chair, I believe our technology is up and working. However, we will still use our break so everyone can come back refreshed.
And I have replied to the person who alerted me, the constituent. Thank you.
And I appreciate technology as our friend and foe at the same time.
So I had the YouTube channel at the same time that I had the Zoom meeting go. Did you get to hear your voice?
I didn't, but I'm glad you're laughing, so it must have been humorous.
Well, you have at least a 3-minute break.
You do too. Use it wisely.
Well, that was a first-time experience for me. Welcome back, everyone, as we gather back. I appreciate everyone's patience and tolerance as we verified that the YouTube broadcast of our meeting was available. Before we took that pause, we were in the process of the public hearing for our engrossed ordinance 882, agenda item E1. So I'd like to turn it back to our board clerk, Ms. Nyola, to see where we're at with folks who wish to testify during this evening's public hearing. The public hearing is still open.
Thank you. Next, we have Anna Maria Ponzi. Anna?
Thank you, and good evening, commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to first agree with everyone who's already testified this evening with their concerns, and I too oppose this ordinance. I also want to note that despite my repeated requests, I have yet to receive any information directly from the county on this initiative, including the recent July 13th Q&A meeting. And like Chair Harrington, I also find the maps and this information very vague, confusing, and unclear. Over my 50 years, I've witnessed the encroachment of the never-ending development near our property off of Vandermost Road. Decades ago, when our family established one of the state's first wineries, we helped to protect our region's agricultural industry through state land use laws, including and most importantly, the adoption of the Ugb. It's therefore incredibly disappointing to see how this once precious boundary seems to be so easily adjusted, devaluing its original intent. Had it been respected in coordination with responsible planning, any infrastructure should have come prior or at minimum hand in hand with the proposed housing. Instead, now we seek a Band-Aid approach to support the overwhelming development, somehow now realizing that housing means more cars. We got it wrong. And that being said, I struggle to now see how extending a road along another road will avoid congestion. This proposal only offers a temporary solution, as I believe the only real way to alleviate congestion is looking at the development and that creates it. We've already seen the result of increased traffic on current connecting roadways from urban areas through farmland. Accidents have increased, human life has been sacrificed with fast-paced commuters. Likewise, the roads have become increasingly dangerous for the local farmers. There's also the continued concern of not having adequate bike lanes, which would provide security to urban cyclists who misjudge the volume and the speed of the vehicles. So I'd like to know what the master plan is. I'd like to know how it ends. And if we don't respect boundaries, how can property owners like Tanya ever feel confident in making future decisions? This ordinance demonstrates how boundaries may change again and again at any moment. I hope that the commission will reconsider to push this, just pushing out the urban footprint, and instead urge them to look at more progressive, longer range planning and seek a more responsible approach to meeting both future housing and agricultural needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Next, I'm going to call on Brett. He is representing 1,000 Friends of Oregon and should receive 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I did not realize I was going to get 5 minutes. Thank you, Board of Commission, for the opportunity to speak before you today. For the record, my name is Brett Morgan, and I work for 1,000 Friends of Oregon as our transportation and great communities advocate. As you all might be aware too, 1,000 Friends has been tracking and working on issues like Ordinance 882 for over 50 years through the urban growth boundary system and the land use system we pioneered here in Oregon. And I think many of the comments we have heard today speak true to some of the conversations and the way that the land use system is supposed to allow for conversations to be facilitated between urban or those folks within the urban growth boundary and those outside, and what the trade-offs we make when we make decisions. If you haven't had the opportunity to, I'd like to direct you to the written comments that we provided to the board, I believe yesterday, which detail in more detail than I can, and with a legal framework as well. Specifically to Ordinance 882, and I want to call out two things that are in the testimony itself. One, as other folks have hinted at, there's an exception being made for this land use goal. There's a goal land use exception being made, but we find that in the appendix and when it is further explained why we're pursuing a unique and limited circumstance for why we would make this land use goal exception. The point is conductivity throughout the roads and desire to limit congestion on our roads. But these are pretty generic and somewhat dubious grounds we consider to base a land use exception and place a goal exception. And we continue to have concerns that if this is the logic that we're using to justify for this specific project, it could be used in multiple other instances and used to degrade and break up farmland and expand outside of farmland. I'd also like to make light of the second thing mentioned in our letter, and other folks have made light of this as well. This TSP amendment is largely dependent on a Ugb land swap that has not happened before and is a new process. And I would also like to argue the point that we're making reliance and assumptions on who will pay for this road potentially in the future without the certainty of the current land use system in the Ugb swap, nor the understanding of who might those payers be in the future. The next point I'd like to make is really a framing of how I look at this issue, and it really is around burdens and benefits and who those are being placed upon. And it's pretty clear that Ordinance 882 is largely for the benefits of folks living within the urban growth boundaries to the detriment of those living outside the urban growth boundaries. You've heard multiple pieces of testimony today from farmers, concerned citizens, people who own land, all variety of folks who all pointed out the fact that this road and its connection to Ordinance 883, I would again stipulate that these two ordinances are very much connected and one is dependent on the other for to really be effective and to reach the goals that you are moving towards. But the construction of the movement towards 882 and the construction of the road eventually will degrade farmland, split up farmland, and really limit the ability of our region and our county moving forward to keep working lands in working fashion. I'd like to close out that I constantly hear in meetings around the region in Clackamas County, Multnomah County, Benton County, that policymakers often feel constrained by the decisions of past decision makers, and that things like a TSP amendment, while seeming innocuous now, will greatly affect and shape the decision making of future policymakers that will come after you. And for the many reasons you've heard today, if you're feeling uncertain about this measure and feel like maybe you don't have all the facts or we don't maybe need it this time, you can certainly add this to the TSP at any moment going forward or work towards that goal. But if you don't feel like you have sufficient grounds right now to do that, you don't have to pass this ordinance. There's no requirement pushing that forward. Closing out too, I would also like to make light that we're in a heat dome and that automotive transportation and the road and infrastructure that we're describing and talking about in Ordinance 882 and in 883 really are automotive road infrastructure that will have a climate impact and will contribute to heat domes and other extreme weather phenomenon like we're currently experiencing. So with that in light and kind of taking into the context of this entire meeting, 1000 Friends of Oregon strongly urges you to oppose Ordinance 882 and its connected measure 883. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Those are all the people that I have listed that signed up for the public hearing. Is there anyone else that would like to speak that has not been called? Please raise your hand. I see no one else, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Nyola. And with that, I will close the public hearing for A engrossed Ordinance 882. Mr. Carr, I have a couple of questions. Is it appropriate for me to ask them now, or should I hold them until we have another public hearing on August 2nd, once we have a motion for that?
You are required to have another public hearing. So it's your preference. We're happy to answer any questions the chair or any of the other commissioners have, but we will have another hearing on August 2nd.
Commissioners, I would like to ask the courtesy of asking a couple of questions tonight, if that's okay with you. Okay. But first, do any of you have questions? You can certainly go first. I have no problem with that. Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
Just a couple of comments and questions. The comments are that if the staff presentations are correct in regard, and I suspect that they are, Aaron, what you've done in terms of timing. Frankly, this road may not ever be built in time for anybody who's viewing this tonight or anyone on this call to ever see it. If you're talking out 40, 50, 60 years. And so one of the dilemmas that I have, and being one board member, is that you're looking at the future and you're trying to say what's it going to look like, and that's very difficult. So that's my comment. My questions are these: is one, the urgency? I don't know. I do know that River Terrace, if they only have one outlet and it's on the Roy Rogers Road, that's not the best alternative. They need some way out. And I guess I don't have a firm grasp on what it would look like as you go up to Tile Flat and all of that. But to me, getting out of that area over to Shoals Ferry is pretty important. So I regret that's going to affect some really fine businesses like Ponzi and other groups, but maybe there's some way to engineer it so that doesn't happen. I mean, I don't know that. But I would like you to recover your ground, Aaron, at some points and explain how this is done, that this board is not the decision maker in regard to the UGBA expansion. We're not. It's City of Tigard has requested certain things. We have a network of streets that are ours or roads, and we're trying to make a circulation pattern that makes some sense, not only for 2022, but for 2072. And so that's a hard thing to do, but at some point you may want to revisit that. And you also may want to revisit the urgency. And the urgency isn't when you need something, it's in the planning as things happen, and we get that. This is the hard stuff. I mean, it's never fun, it's the hard stuff. So my questions are, can you recover that? Maybe not tonight, but at least at the next meeting, and have prepared for those kinds of questions. So that's my comments and my question.
We can certainly do that for the next hearing. I can also address it now if you'd prefer to hear a little bit more about that at this time. Go ahead. Okay. So the decision to expand the urban growth boundary, as you said, did come from the City of Tigard. The way that Portland Metro has laid out the process, in order to do an urban growth boundary expansion, a city has to meet the concept plan requirements that are established by Metro's rules. City of Tigard did that, and they made that request to Metro as a part of the 2021 mid-cycle UGB adjustment. And that's also a new process. Metro established the mid-cycle, I want to say, as a part of the 2018 urban growth boundary expansion. I'm looking at Chair Harrington. I know she'll remember this. I believe as a part of the 2018 cycle, they established the mid-cycle, and that allowed them to revisit the urban growth boundary within a 3-year time period rather than waiting the usual 6 years. So 2021 would have been the first mid-year opportunity. When Metro looked at Tigard's application, they determined that due to, or Metro COO looked at it, it's still staff review, not Metro Council review. So staff looked at it, evaluated it technically, and determined that it was a concept plan that met the requirements. But they determined that rather than do the mid-cycle adjustment, which required a statement of need for expanding it, it made more sense at this time to do the land swap approach. And this has not been done in Metro yet, but it is a set of rules that are established by state statute, and other MPOs within the state can follow this process as well. It's just the first time that Metro is doing it. And so as a part of that, they need to do a technical analysis to find where the land can come from. And that's the piece that they haven't finished yet. So Metro staff are currently doing the technical work that will lead them to identify what land could be identified already within the urban growth boundary. My understanding from Metro staff is that that land would then become urban reserve and would replace this land, which would then come into the urban growth boundary. So I believe this is all still being determined right now, and so we'll see how this plays out. Metro Council has not yet weighed in and shown their preference for if they would like to do this. I do think that it's important to keep two things in mind. First of all, that the county doesn't get to make this decision at all. We're a part of it. We have conversations with our city partners and with Metro, but they're the ones who make these decisions. We end up in a bit of a reactionary position when these happen. And as the transportation provider, we find it's important for us to consider what we need out of our transportation system so that we can continue to provide a connected multimodal system. And then the second thing I think is important to keep in mind is that we identified the need for this collector facility before we knew that Tigard was going to ask to add it to the urban growth boundary. So while it is more likely to be built if this land does come into the urban growth boundary and start developing and needing a transportation network, at which time development would probably build part, most of it maybe, we identified the need before we knew that part of it. So there's a couple of different moving technical analysis pieces happening. And when we come back next week, we can be prepared to address this again.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers and Ms. Wardell. Vice Chair Willie, how about you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. That I was anticipating that I'm going to need to have just a little bit more conversation with you, but that was a great explanation. And I think from my standpoint, I'd love to hear a little bit more about this whole process. I heard the testimonies tonight, and I understand that. I travel that area a lot because my family lives in Sherwood. So I go there, but I want to have a better understanding of this, and I certainly understand the concerns that we heard tonight from the testimony. So I will reach out, Aaron, just ask for maybe 15 minutes to understand the land swap part of it, because I don't get that. So anyway, thank you for that.
To use your phraseology, Vice Chair Willie, I don't get it either. It's new for all of us. You know, as Ms. Wardell mentioned, it is an aspect of land use that the state allows, but Metro has never utilized it. So we have no basis of explanation. And I know I haven't invested any time in looking at any recent past information for the Metro Council that describes it either. So we're all on the same learning journey. You're not alone, believe me. Commissioner Fye, do you have any questions at this juncture? No, okay. Thank you, Ms. Wardell, for speaking about the mid-cycle UGB expansion request that the city of Tigard submitted. And since they submitted that, came this new idea of the Ugb land swap. And thank you for your comments on that, so that I understand how there is the potential for such a thing to swap out existing urban reserve land with land already in the urban growth boundary elsewhere. And as a former Metro councilor and councilors before me lived with the decision back to the 2002 UGB expansion that was which was done using the soil classification hierarchy, where there is land out in the Damascus area that is in the urban growth boundary, but doesn't seem to be in any rush for urbanization. So that could be some of the land that they're looking at, but there may be others as well. So thank you for clarifying that for me. I just have a couple of questions, and I don't need the answer now. Just later, such as with the August 2nd public hearing, if you could once again provide a presentation for us, because I think that helps all of us. I remember the history of adopting urban and rural reserves, right? And all the remands that were involved with that in Court of Appeals. What I don't remember is the time frame by which the area, and if I look at slide number, slide number 5. Oh, there it is. There was a time, I think, when the land south of Shoals Ferry Road, but west of that upper blue urban reserve might have been in rural reserve. And I don't know when that little brown area right at the top of Shoals Ferry Road and Tile Flat Road was made rural no reserve, to use your nomenclature, what I used to call undesignated, rural undesignated. So if you could clarify for me now, if you know it, but certainly August 2nd, that would be awesome, when that had that status. Then the other questions that I have is if we go through this process with this ordinance and the county TSP is adopted. It's my understanding that for the urban reserve areas, so the areas in blue, there can be through the planning process, right, with development, that right-of-way purchases could be made for that, or there could be conditions on the development as you talked about in the packet material. So it sounds like I got that part right so far. Okay.
Yes.
But my question is for that area that is rural, no reserve, if we don't adopt the ordinance now or in current time, well, what am I trying to get at? What I'm really trying to understand is that for that hatched area in the brown part, we can't just purchase that property or purchase the right-of-way needs to put that road in such an area without further public process and property owner engagement and willingness and all that, right?
Adding the line to our plan allows us to acquire right-of-way and construct the road. So adding it to our plan at this time would allow us to do that. It would be unlikely to be done as a part of development, not impossible, but unlikely because it is rural undesignated or rural no reserve. But it would be possible for that to happen. We could have some development within what's now the urban reserve area even contribute towards that extraterritorial kind of improvement, because it'll be in our plan. We'll know it's an improvement that we're trying to achieve and we'll have the ability to do that.
Okay, thank you. Then the last question I have is, so I'm frankly, I'll just say I'm a little bit bothered by the fact that some people seem to think that this TSP is being done in response to the city of Tigard's mid-cycle UGB expansion request. When this is a TSP amendment idea that has been around for quite well since the development of an adoption of those urban reserves. So the question I'm trying to get at is, I understand that we have another public hearing on April 2nd, but could we just as easily delay action on a decision on that until after the Metro Council has had the opportunity to decide if they want to entertain a land swap, and or after they decide if they even want to grant a mid-cycle UGB expansion request as made by the city of Tigard?
That would be something the board could consider, and we would want to consult with county council to probably bring forward an option for what that could look like for the board and how we would continue to a date certain. What that would mean from a technical standpoint is that if we wait until the land comes into the urban growth boundary, we no longer need the exception analysis for the part that is in blue. And as you said, we've been working on developing this ordinance and associated Cooper Mountain area ordinances since 2015, probably going back to the Beaverton work that was done way before we knew that City of Tigard would be making this request, or even that it would be possible for them to make a request in the year 2021. So most of our technical work predated that. We worked with City of Tigard as they were developing their River Terrace 2.0 concept plan and explained our intent behind this ordinance and what we would like to see. We do want to make sure that their development has this internal collector circulation if it is brought into the urban growth boundary and if it starts to develop. So deferring a decision until after we know the decision on the urban growth boundary is something that the board could consider doing. Now, the piece that's in undesignated, just south of Tile Flat Road, would still need that exceptions analysis. And so we would likely still need the TSP amendment as we have framed it today, although with the line work and the text reference updated to explain that it's now only that piece of the segment that's outside the urban growth boundary. So there would be some restructuring to the ordinance at that time, but the exceptions analysis, technical work would still need to be included in our TSP.
Okay. Okay. I also understand that listening session that you had recently on July 13th was regarding property owners. Was it for property owners as notified just in the blue area, or was it for property owners in that brown area as well up by Shoals Ferry Road?
It was both. So we looked at the corridor, the roadway corridor, which is wide, it's 375 feet, and then we applied a buffer to that. Additionally, for the July 13th session, we noticed everyone who's in the rural reserve area who takes access off of Vandermost Road, because that road would have a future intersection with this alignment, even though the alignment does not go into the rural reserve area. I believe the Ponzi Vineyard is in the rural reserve area, for example, so not directly impacted, but included in our invitation to that listening session. And I will say, I know we've heard testimony tonight from some people saying that they didn't know about that listening session. I did verify that they were included in our notice for that, and we have interacted with those property owners in other fashions with other meetings and phone calls as well.
And that notification was done through a letter?
It was.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate having the opportunity to share my questions and even to get some answers to that this evening. Thank you very much. So with that, commissioners, where we're at is we've held our public hearing this evening, our first public hearing on engrossed ordinance 882. We've also had the opportunity for some Q&A with our staff and sharing comments with one another. And at this juncture, I'm looking for a motion to continue the public hearing for our second, tonight was our second public hearing, but we need to continue and have a public hearing next Tuesday, August 2nd, on this engrossed ordinance. Do we have such a motion? We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Fye. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Next, slight change of plans. We had a hiccup with regard to accepting testimony during our initial public comment period. Someone who was signed up was missed. So before we move on to our second topic for public hearings, given the passage of the evening, I would like to ask our board clerk if she could please call on that person and that we would pick back up from there.
Yes, Dale, are you unmuted?
Yes, can you hear me, Anna?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dale Feik, Forest Grove District 4 resident, Chair Harrington and County Commissioners. And Anna, I realized that Kevin's grandmother passed away and there were some problems with how this all worked for me to make public comment now instead of at the beginning of the meeting. Personally, I want to thank you, Commissioner Pam Treese, even though she's on vacation, for writing the attached document that I sent to you an email titled Statement on Overturning of Roe versus Wade at the Washington County Board of Commission meeting July 12th. I also want to thank you, Madam Chair Harrington and Commissioner Nafisa Fye, for also signing it. I appreciate the honoring of each person's personal belief systems when you, Commissioner Roy Rogers and Commissioner Jerry Willey, decided not to sign it. As Commissioner Tree said, this is not a letter, but a statement. The beginning sentence reads, "We are dismayed and frustrated by our U.S. Supreme Court has chosen to disregard nearly 50 years of legal precedent protecting the right to abortion in this country." And then she goes on, and I'm asking you in writing to please review what she wrote to you. And I copied it and pasted it in the email that I sent to you. And I also sent an email, and I doubt that the attached document titled "Women Die and That's Pro-Life" by Nick Kristof will change your minds, Commissioners Rogers and Willey, but please consider reading it. So that's statement one. Statement two has to do with an email I sent to the Environmental Quality Commissioners about Director Richard Whitman retiring at the end of December as the Director of DEQ. I'm so impressed with what he's done and changing the culture and how he's really helped fulfill the mission of DEQ. Thank you for letting me make my comment now instead of wait at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Ms. Niola. I appreciate that. Next, we'll move on to our second public hearing topic of the evening, and this is regarding Ordinance 888. And I would ask Mr. Carr if he could, well, first, I would ask the commission if we could have a motion to read Ordinance 888 by title only. We have a motion from Commissioner Fye, a second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Mr. Carr, could you please read the ordinance by title only?
Of course, Chair Harrington. Ordinance 888, an ordinance declaring a temporary ban on certain psilocybin businesses and declaring an emergency. And I will be the lead presenter on this. So if it's okay with you, Chair Harrington, I will proceed. Good evening, commissioners. Good evening, commissioners. We have an all-star team here to help you work through this tonight. We have Stephen Roberts and Teresa Cherniak and Todd Borowitz from LUT, and we have Mira Semantle from HHS and Rob Bovet from my office to walk us through, but I will lead off the presentation now. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is a background on Measure 109. As you know, it was passed in November 2020. It legalized license and regulated manufacturing, transportation, delivery, sale, and purchase of psilocybin products and the provision of psilocybin services in Oregon. It is similar to, but different than, the marijuana legalization measures. It was approved by 59% of the voters in Washington County, with only 56% statewide. The Oregon Health Authority has completed some rulemaking. However, rules for citing and operation of psilocybin businesses have not been drafted. We expect completion by the end of the year. On January 2nd, 2023, the OHA will be required to begin accepting license applications, including for businesses to manufacture, test, and administer psilocybin. The ordinance, the measure does allow for local jurisdictions to pass an ordinance banning psilocybin activities in their jurisdiction. If you pass that ordinance, then OHA is notified that they are not to issue any licenses in that jurisdiction. The measure also requires that any such ordinance must be referred to the voters at the next general election, which in this case would be the November 2022 election. Next slide, please. So this is a background you're very familiar with. On July 12th, we had a work session where the board provided some direction to us to go ahead and prepare an ordinance. The board had first reading of that ordinance on July 19th. Next slide, please. So I want to turn it over to Ms. Semantle, who can talk a little bit about the health policy impacts.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carr. For the record, again, my name is Mira Semantle. I'm the Interim Director of Health and Human Services here with Washington County. So as Tom did a great job reviewing Measure 109 and noting the prior board consideration at the work session on July 12th and the first reading of Ordinance 888 on July 19th. So just a brief high-level review of the policy context for psilocybin services. As stated in Measure 109, a key purpose to legalize psilocybin services in Oregon is to expand therapeutic options for mental illness among adults and improve the physical, mental, and social well-being of all Oregonians. Psilocybin is a psychedelic substance that has been used for medicinal and religious purposes throughout history, and preliminary evidence from small clinical studies indicates that psilocybin may be effective and safe for the treatment of some mental health conditions in controlled settings and among select participants. Measure 109 created the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which was charged with advising the Oregon Health Authority regarding the safety and efficacy of psilocybin in treating mental health conditions. A research subcommittee of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board was tasked with a literature review for this purpose and provided recommendations. The evidence review by the subcommittee cited that psilocybin may be effective in reducing some substance use disorders, including problematic alcohol and tobacco use, and addiction was not listed as one of the risks cited in the rapid evidence review by the OPAB. All right, next slide, please.
I think Teresa Cherniak is going to take this one, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Tom. So after January of this year, the Oregon Health Authority will begin accepting applications for licenses that will allow new types of land uses, including psilocybin manufacturing, which will need to happen indoors, where the mushrooms to make psilocybin will be grown and processed. The psilocybin service centers, which are the establishments where psilocybin will be administered to clients, and then the testing facilities. Where there's a new unique type of a land use like these, usually land use and transportation staff first determine whether it's like another use. And if not, we undertake a process to amend the community development code, considering where the new uses might be most appropriate and where they might not be appropriate. For instance, with psilocybin service centers, we would consider whether they should be allowed in residential areas and some rural districts. We'd also then consider whether there might be some appropriate standards to address any possible impacts from the use. These might include things like distance from sensitive schools, or sensitive uses like schools or other psilocybin businesses, requirements, say, for fencing of any outdoor areas, security requirements, or hours of operation. And then we'd consider what type of land use review is appropriate. For instance, whether the uses were allowed outright or needed a land use permit. This is the approach that we took on marijuana business regulations, which are included in our community development code now. And it would be the clearest and most transparent approach on the land use side of psilocybin businesses. Typically, we don't develop our regulations until state rulemaking is complete, since the rulemaking often will address the various items we might include in our regulations. So we take our cues from the rules, and we don't want to be inconsistent with what the rules end up being. Because the state hasn't yet started their rulemaking for the service centers in particular, we haven't started developing any local regulations, and that actually was not yet included in our work program. Next slide, please. A few of the things that we do know now that have land use implications. One is that the measure was unclear about whether psilocybin businesses are allowed in residential districts in the unincorporated area. It is clear about cities, and the measure does say they aren't allowed in a primary residence. But this would be likely one of those items in our regulations to make clear whether the businesses would be allowed in residential districts. Another is that the measure does allow reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. So again, things like where the uses are allowed and any standards for operation. Some of these are included in the measure, but others are likely to be developed through the rulemaking. And in a similar way, when the recreational marijuana measure passed some years ago, the county did determine that some time, place, and manner regulations were needed, and implemented a temporary ban while the regulations were developed and adopted. Also similar to the marijuana uses, the measure requires us to provide a land use compatibility statement, or LUX, for all of the psilocybin related license applications.
When we fill out a Lux, we're certifying whether the use is allowed in the proposed location and whether there's a required permit process. Without local definitions and time, place, and manner regulations, there could be confusion over whether the uses are allowed in different areas and potential litigation over the code interpretations that staff would end up making. These implications support the idea of a temporary delay until state rules are known and there's time to develop any appropriate regulations. With that, I will turn it back to Mr. Carr.
Thank you, Ms. Cheriak. Next slide, please. So the staff recommendation is to refer a ballot measure to Washington County voters in November of this year to temporarily opt out for a maximum of 2 years. We don't recommend permanently banning psilocybin business. Of course, when I say we, I mean HHS and LUT. The County Council has no recommendation on this. This is a similar approach that the board took for marijuana. If the temporary opt-out is approved, the LUT department will begin legislative process to develop time, place, and manner regulations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, there you go. So this is the timeline. You introduced it on July 19th. Today, we're having a second public reading, and public hearing. This is an opportunity for the board to direct any amendment or engrossment of the ordinance. On August 2nd, if the board engrosses the ordinance this evening, then there'll be a public hearing on the engrossed ordinance. If not, if there are no engrossments, then there will be a vote on the final approval of the ordinance and a resolution in order. If the ordinance is approved, resolution or putting it on the ballot for the November 8th, 2022 election. Next slide, please. So these are the options we've talked about, and you may have seen we've added one. Option 1 is reject the ordinance on August 2nd, no temporary opt-out. Option 2 is take no action for now and defer action on the ordinance to November or December. At that point, we may have a better idea about what the state's doing, and then you could pass an ordinance. If you pass an ordinance in November or December, that ordinance would effectively ban psilocybin businesses from being licensed effective January 1st, 2023. That ordinance would be referred to the ballot at the next general election, which would be November 2024. The staff is not recommending this, but we thought we'd tell you that this is an option. We expect that this is untested, although similar things were done with marijuana. The language of the measure appears to allow for this. It could be contested. The recommendation is to approve the ordinance on August 2nd, implement the temporary 2-year opt-out. Option 4 is to engross the ordinance today with either a shorter or longer period or no sunset at all. So those are the 4 options. Next slide, please. That's it. Any questions?
I realized that the packet was not updated with this presentation. So commissioners, I hope that you have taken note of the definitions of opt-out, option 1, 2, 3, and 4. I just downloaded the packet and checked the packet again once I noticed that it was different from the prior version. So if you need just a moment to write out what those options are for yourself prior to the public hearing, in case folks mention the options, take a photo now if you can. Do you have any questions before we open a public hearing? Go ahead, Vice Chair Willie.
Well, yeah, this frustrates me a little bit that I just get this information at 9 o'clock at night with no advance notice. Our last meeting was an ordinance that was written to go to the voters for a 2-year delay. And now we have option 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't understand why this is now coming to us at this particular point in time. So I realize, Chair, that you and Commissioner Treese were opposed to this. You wanted to adopt the implementation of this on January 1, accept the OHA's recommendations. I think there was conversation by 3 of the commissioners that had some concerns about that, and now we have 4 options. So yeah, this frustrates me. And again, it's kind of a blindside proposal, and I'd like to hear more conversation about where this came from.
I think if I might, Commissioner Willie, I understand the difference between the 3 options that I believe we had from our last meeting and today is that Mr. Carr has been clear with us about what option 4 is, that with having an election with no sunset. So I don't believe that options, well, maybe option 2 is new. Maybe I have it wrong. Let me stop there before I make the situation worse. And Mr. Carr, if you could address Commissioner Willie's question, that would be most helpful. I should have
I'm happy
started
to.
there.
And Commissioner Willie, I do want to apologize. This is something that we discussed on Friday. And as I said, it's an option that if you read the technical language of the measure, it's allowable, but it's never been tested. So it's not clear what a court would do with this. So it actually is in the packet, and Chair, I just checked. This version got uploaded yesterday. And so we worked on it on Friday, and it was uploaded. So, and I apologize if we should have done more to note that, and that's on us.
Okay, my question to you, Tom, is who is we?
Our
you
team.
Say we worked this on Friday. I was at NACO.
No, so Mr. Roberts, Mr. Bovet, Ms. Cherniak, and I worked on this Friday and over the weekend. And
okay, so my frustration is that first of all, there was that kind of conversation over that period of time. It is now Tuesday. This is the first time I've seen this. There's number 4, okay? There's number 2. And I'm thinking I'm going to go into this conversation tonight with what we agreed upon last week in a 3-2 vote, that we would approve number 3, option number 3, and that's where we were going. Now we have 4 options back on the table again.
so Commissioner Willie, all you did last week was introduce it on first reading. That wasn't an approval. The approval can't come until Tuesday. This is another legal option that we're laying out for you. You don't need to vote on this tonight unless you want to amend the ordinance. The vote would come next Tuesday. So you have time to consider this, and I apologize, and we're happy to sit down and meet with you and discuss this. This is just your staff trying to make sure you have every option in front of you before you have to make a determination.
I get that.
And that's our job.
I get that, Tom. I understand that, but not at 9 o'clock at night in a public hearing, okay? If you wanted to communicate with me, then you should have done it yesterday, okay? I don't like surprises no more than the chair likes surprises. This is a surprise. It's a significant modification to what we talked about a week ago, and it doesn't bode well with me.
Commissioner Willie, there is only one change in the options between last week's meeting and what we've seen display. So
only one change, but it's significant, Chair. And quite frankly, you opposed last week's ordinance of a 3-2 vote. You opposed that. And now we have a modification. Seems to me like there's some bait and switch going on here, and there's some conversations going on behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden, Tuesday night, we have options. Just doesn't feel very right to me.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Willie, I think we have a misunderstanding. What the position that Commissioner Treese and I took in the minority last week was with regard to continuing through the process, the ordinance process. Okay, but on a vote of 3-2, the board chose to continue with the process. So now this is the process, having the ordinance read and having a public hearing tonight, with the next step of the process being the decision next Tuesday, whether or not to adopt an ordinance. The only variation on that is we have an ordinance on the table, right? Ordinance 888. And if the board wishes to make those changes, in addition to having the public hearing tonight, we would also have to make a decision on any possible engrossments. So
there's still another option. Okay.
Oh,
there's still another option that has not been discussed at the commission level prior to tonight. And so we're supposed to evaluate option 4 with no sunset. We didn't talk about no sunset. We talked about a 2-year sunset. Option 2, no action now, defer action on the ordinance till November, December. That wasn't even on the docket. So no, I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay.
There's a lot of variety in what our decision-making is supposed to be tonight and next week.
Okay, I understand more clearly what you're saying. Okay, and I don't disagree with you at all. Okay. Mr. Carr, I'm sorry. Gave you the wrong title.
I want to object to the bait and switch. That's not fair. We provided this to you at 6 o'clock last night, and I know it was late. We're just trying to do our jobs.
Seriously,
we're not trying to
6
deceive
o'clock
you.
last night, Tom, that
Yeah.
counts. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it won't be, it's not a bait and switch. I don't mean to offend you by the
You
terminology.
did.
Okay. I apologize for that. But this offends me. Okay.
Well,
The
so-
fact
so
that at
all we're
9
doing-
o'clock at night, we're having this conversation offends me. So I guess we're both equally offended. I apologize if I offended you with my
So-
terminology, but this doesn't work.
To be clear, the only thing that was added was option 2. We had 3 options last week. We added another option, which I think is legally questionable, but I included it out of an excess of caution. If you want us to take it out, we can do that. But there's really very little reason to insult your staff. And that's what you're doing. These are people who work really hard to get this in front of you. And I think it's inappropriate.
Let's try and be clear about this, Tom. There was no implication that I was insulting the staff. If you took offense to it, I apologize to it. Okay. But it's not about staff. This is about communication. This is about eyes wide open when I go into a public hearing, that I know what the hell we're talking about. Okay. And I didn't. Now you can say you said at 6 o'clock last night. Well, I was at a WEA event till 9 o'clock last night. Okay. So I'm sorry. I didn't pull it up and I didn't look at it. I guess that's on me. But this doesn't work. So we can move on.
Commissioner Rogers?
Just for clarification, in adding option 2, have the options been renumbered from what we approved the last time? So we're clear. If we went with, we went with 3, is that 2 last time? I'm sorry, I don't have last
2 was added between 1 and 3.
Pardon me?
2 was added between 1 and 3. It's really
no, but I mean, if we saw them last time, what would 3 have been numbered so that we're consistent? I don't have that from Tom.
3 would have been 2.
2, okay, that's what I want to know.
But to be clear, the ordinance hasn't changed at all. The ordinance still incorporates option 3. All we're doing is going over ways you could change the ordinance.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm still in favor of what now is option 3. I guess it was 2 last time. So I was, for the record, trying to be clear so that we don't sit there and say, well, we're still in favor of 2, which 2 now has changed and 2 is 3 and all that. But I'm still with the staff recommendation.
Yeah. And for the record, what threw me is we didn't get any indication that the presentation changed. And it was done after the ordinary 3 p.m. on Monday deadline, so that the commission knew to be prepared for the presentation change. Thank you, Mr. Carr, for making it clear that the ordinance hasn't changed, but we do know that we have an additional option that had not been previously covered. So thank you for that. And I join Commissioner Willie in apologizing if any staff feels in any way offended or slighted in any way this evening, as we try to make sure we understand what we've had the benefit of understanding through tonight's presentation. So we have a presentation, staff report. Do we have any remaining commissioner questions before we move on to the public hearing? Okay, Ms. Niola, we've read the ordinance by title only. We've had the staff report. Could you please, or I'd like to open the public hearing. Could you please bring in the folks who wish to testify? Thank you.
Yes, first to speak is Jesse Euling. Jesse?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Couldn't hear you, Anna. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening. I'm Jesse Euling. I'm a mycologist and a professor at Oregon State University with over 15 years experience, including many high-profile peer-reviewed publications. I'm also the mycologist and the co-chair of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, but today I'm speaking to you as an Oregonian. Psilocybin is non-addictive, safe, it's a naturally occurring medicine in mushrooms with proven efficacy in treating mental health conditions like depression, addiction, PTSD, and anxiety, as evidenced by the recent FDA designation as a breakthrough therapy. This is not marijuana. The production process and biology of these organisms is different than marijuana. However, psilocybin is not a silver bullet. It won't work for everyone, and we take that reality very seriously. We summarize evidence for both the efficacy and the potential negative outcomes in a document that was previously referred to as a rapid evidence review. It's available on the Psilocybin Services website. I also personally summarize all the biochemical, mycological, and ethnomycological history of psilocybin production and usage in an open access peer-reviewed publication in the journal Fungal Biology, which I can share with you. We, as a board, have put forward very reasonable recommendations to the OHA, and they've already put some of those into rules through their expedited rulemaking for training programs, products, and testing licenses. For example, of the over 200 species of fungi that produce psilocybin, we're going with just one, Psilocybe cubensis. We're not doing synthetic psilocybin because we don't have the oversight to meaningfully regulate that process safely. All clients will be over 21 and will undergo extensive screening and preparation sessions. This is not a dispensary model. And I recommended these guidelines because I, like you, want to live, work, and raise my family in a peaceful and safe community that is free from illicit activity. It's okay to have questions about this approach because it's new and transdisciplinary, but as community leaders, we have a responsibility to help address this mental health crisis. So I encourage you to think of the people who might not make it those 2 years, and I encourage you not to opt out of psilocybin licenses for businesses. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Next is Barbara Hansen. Barbara, can you please unmute?
Hi, again, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I am an RN with over 35 years of experience working in hospice in Oregon. I currently serve as the CEO of the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association, which is a statewide public benefit organization helping to ensure Oregonians have access to high quality hospice and palliative care as they near the end of life. And although I serve on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, I am testifying today in my role with the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association. There are 15 hospice and palliative care programs that serve Washington County, and 11 of them are members of our association. These programs provide excellent care for many hundreds of Washington County residents each year. So my purpose in testifying today is to respectfully ask the county commissioners to consider the needs of seriously and terminally ill residents when you discuss Ordinance 888. I have never personally taken psilocybin, but I know there have been studies done at Johns Hopkins and NYU showing very promising results about the benefits of psilocybin in improving symptoms of depression and anxiety, among others. The improvements are even after one single treatment, and they can last for many months. More studies will be done and need to be done, but these results already show the possible benefits for persons who will need palliative or hospice care. Please allow them to have access to this promising treatment. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today.
Thank you. And next we have Sherry. Sherry, can you please unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Sherry Savoyton Terry. I am from Forest Grove. I've been a depressive my whole life. I suffer from depression and anxiety. In 2020, I had a lung cancer surgery, and they took out half of my left lung, and I got severely depressed over that period of time for a year. And I just kept thinking, I can't wait till 2023 for the psilocybin to be legal here. So I just want all of you that need to know more about psilocybin to watch the movie that's on Netflix, How to Change Your Mind, and look at Paul Stamets and see his research. One of my friends I told about this delay, she said people are going to die. So I know that sounds dramatic, but this can seriously help a lot of people. So I really urge you to have no delay and do option 1, if I read that correctly. And I wanted to add that the ripple effect of psilocybin could mean less people in the fancy new facility that they're building in Beaverton. So please don't take this decision lightly. I don't know, it's really hard to talk about mental health stuff, and I'm short of breath because of my lung issue, but I just want you all to tune in and open your hearts. Anyways, I better stop talking. But thank you, Harrington and Therese, for being on board.
Thank you, Sherry. Chair, that's all the people I have that signed up. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this ordinance? Please raise your hand. I see no hands.
Thank you, Ms. Niola. And with that, we'll close tonight's public hearing. Board members, I would refer us back to the presentation. The options on the presentation are, I think, a little out of sync with the requested action, perhaps, on the packet table that I'm seeing before me, but that could entirely be my problem. Let me go back to, well, I can't. I have to do an unusual clearing of the cache, which is ridiculously arduous. So anyway, what we've closed the public hearing. I want to make sure I'm doing these procedures right. What we need to decide tonight is if we want to proceed next week with Ordinance 888 as it stands, or do we wish to entertain any changes to the ordinance that would require us to consider those and engross the ordinance tonight. Otherwise, we will delay further decision-making on the ordinance to next Tuesday. Mr. Carr, I saw you raise your hand and then not, but you're unmuted. Did I capture that correctly?
Yes, which is why I lowered my hand, Chair.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. Vice Chair Willie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments and then ask for a procedural perspective. So we have heard from the voters that this product needs to be available. That is not in question from my standpoint. There isn't an option to ban this completely, and we're not even considering that. In regards to our 2-year deferral, I really strongly believe it will not be 2 years. I think we need to give our staff opportunity to evaluate what the OHA rules that come out. We haven't even seen them that, and then an opportunity for our LUT department to determine where we have siting available. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this before we can implement this. And I think that's the reason why I'm going with option 3, because we need to take those things into consideration. I heard I have compassion for those who are testifying that they need this. I understand that. I am not opposing that. I'm just advocating that as a county commissioner, I believe we need to make sure that we understand the rules and that we are complying with the guidelines that will be provided by the state. So with all of that, Chair, I am concerned a little bit that Commissioner Therese is not here tonight, and she was obviously in opposition to option 3. I don't want this to be possibly a 2-2 tonight. So how do we go about making sure that Commissioner Therese is heard in her vote next week?
Let me allay your fears. Okay. You're correct that there are 4 of us here tonight. I vote last, and I am in agreement that a decision should be made next week. Okay, so I am in no way, I don't have a need to exercise my political power and influence through my vote of one. Okay, I've made accommodations to attend next week's meeting, even though I'm on vacation. So let me allay your fears, okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I
Tonight,
just wanted
the
to make sure
purpose
that,
tonight was to have the public hearing and to decide if the board thinks there is a need to make changes to ordinance 888 and do an engrossment, okay? I am choosing to not exercise the option, as you recognize, to thwart having a decision opportunity next Tuesday. Okay?
all right. Yes, thank you for that. And again, I was mostly considerate of trying to be considerate of Commissioner Treese. She's not here tonight, but I wanted to make sure we heard her vote as well. So thank you for that.
Okay, commissioners. Do any of you have a need to consider any changes to ordinance 888 that would require us to have consideration of those and engrossment? I'm not seeing anyone have any indication. All right, so Mr. Carr, just to make sure I do this right, especially since some of these options involve time is of the essence, if I could use that phrase. The ordinance that is in our current packet, I believe that is reflective of the staff recommendation to implement an opt-out and election with a 2-year sunset. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Yes, okay, thank you. So we don't need to take any, oh, let me double check my sheet of paper. Do we need to take an action to move the draft ordinance forward for next Tuesday?
No, you could move to continue consideration, but it's already scheduled. So
Okay.
I'll move to continue would probably be the appropriate motion.
Okay, let's do that then. Board members, do we have a motion to consider moving forward with ordinance 888 for next Tuesday? We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. Do we have a second? We have a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor of moving forward with consideration of the ordinance for next Tuesday's meeting, please vote by raising your hand. The motion is unanimous. Well, anyone opposed? There are none. The motion is unanimous 4-0. So next week we will, next Tuesday, August 2nd, Vice Chair Willie will be running the meeting, and on the agenda will be the consideration of adopting ordinance 888, which is the option for a opt-out of with a 2-year sunset. Okay, go ahead, Vice Chair Willie.
You were supposed to give me an easy agenda for next week. What happened with that?
I blew it, sorry.
All right, thank you.
All righty then. So the next item on our agenda for this evening is our second public comment period. This is an opportunity for community members to come and share their thoughts with us for up to 5 minutes a person. Ms. Niola, do we have anyone who wishes to speak with us at this time?
I had no one signed up, but if there's anyone, please raise your hands. No hands.
All righty, thank you. Next on the agenda is board announcements. I'll start the process off. As mentioned, we will have board meetings next week. We have a work session starting at 9 a.m. Then it will pause so that Vice Chair Willie can run the business meeting starting at 10 a.m. with the Housing Authority Board of Directors meeting at 10, followed by the board meeting at 10:30, and then reconvening the work session at probably 1 p.m. I'll see you all in Eastern Standard Time. Then there is a work session on Tuesday, August 9th. Not sure that I left you a simple agenda that day either, Vice Chair Willie. On Tuesday, August 16th, as there are 3 of us on the commission who will be away on vacation, the meetings are canceled, no quorum. So that means we will have had 1 meeting in August with the full board. Yay us for modeling taking vacations. Then we're into the month of September. Ta-da, folks, we are reconvening in person. On Thursday, September 1st, we'll have our roundtable. So the board will be meeting in person, which means we'll be moving to hybrid mode. So our public can attend in person, or you can continue to tune in through Zoom and YouTube because we will be hybrid versus 100% virtual. Still the same people. Then on Tuesday, September 6th, that's the Monday after the Labor Day holiday, we'll have the joint pair of meetings, work session starting at 9 a.m., board meeting at 10. And the following Tuesday, September 13th, Vice Chair Willie is going to have to preside over that meeting again, as Commissioner Treese and I will be away on a Clean Water Services trip. And that's it for now on September meetings. We will have another set of meetings in September. So in the month of September, we'll have 2 meetings with the full board in attendance. So that's it for board announcements from me this evening. Any from the rest of the commission? All righty. Well, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn today's meeting? We have a motion from Commissioner Fye and a second from Vice Chair Willie. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Our meeting this evening is hereby adjourned. Everyone, please take good care of yourself in this heat wave that we have. I just saw the email from our emergency manager that the forecast has been extended into possibly Saturday. So do take care and be very safe. Watch out for one another. Bye now.